First, we are going to talk about China trade policy, and this is somewhat new. I guess these days, anything that's more than a day old is old news, but still good news, right? So we have a preliminary deal between the US and China effective November 10th that reduced that 20% IEEPA tariff rate down to 10%. A common question is it just 10% now? It is not. So there's what we have tariff stacking these days. So we've got the 10% plus a 10% reciprocal on China, plus the 301 duties, plus your base duty rate. But this deal avoided that 100% tariff hike that was set to begin on November 1st and holds the 10% reciprocal rate through November 10th of 2026. As I said, lowers the IEEPA tariff rate from 20 to 10%, and also extends a bunch of these Section 301 exclusions, which was really good news because a lot of folks are still benefiting from those. And those are all on the same timeline until November 10th of 2026. So, and I guess two other things that aren't on the slide. It also delayed implementation of the China ships fees, which from a transportation perspective is very beneficial, right? So anyone who's shipping by ocean freight, we won't see any price hikes, which we probably would have seen eventually with these ships fees. And it also delayed the 50% rule for exports. If any of you are exporting, that was a big concern, particularly in the semicon space. So what does this mean for you? I think this is the most important point. So you have some certainty now, right? Probably a year till November 10th of next year. And, you know, this puts China on more solid footing as a supply option, a much better strategic option, especially if you're in the China plus one space. However, there are a lot of contingencies in this agreement. So China has to buy so much of, the soybeans, and, there are a lot of checks on both sides. So, there's also an opportunity here to pull this back if China fails to meet any of its commitments. And I would say correspondingly also if the US fails to meet some of its commitments to China. So we've got a little bit of certainty, but as we know now, not full certainty. So I mentioned this 50% rule. This is important. If you're exporting, what does this mean for you? It's been delayed for a year. What do I do now? And the answer is not wait and see what happens. We just got more detail on the agreement with South Korea, which is great. This is really good news. If you're bringing freight in from South Korea, they got a 15% European Union-like deal. So importers will not pay more than 15%, including both the base duty rate and the reciprocal rate. Reduced 232 tariffs on a bunch of commodities, including autos and auto parts. And a special deal on semiconductor Section 232 tariffs that are due to come out. We're going to talk about this in a second. We don't know what that deal is going to look like, but South Korea is assured at least the equivalent of the best deal in town once these are finally announced. So this is good news for anybody in the semicon space trading with South Korea. And we have this so-called Annex 3, which are a list of items that can't be sourced or easily sourced in the US. And these countries that are putting together deals would potentially get zero reciprocal tariffs for products, certain products in Annex 3. And every country won't get all of them. So we have to wait for the final agreements to come out to really know what will be on the list. We probably will get Section 301 duties, the China-like duties on products from Nicaragua soon. We've got a framework agreement for all of these countries listed here: Switzerland, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. The Switzerland deal is a European Union-like deal as well, maximum of 15%, including the base duty rate and the reciprocal rate. That will reportedly be effective in early 2026. We don't have dates for any of these other countries yet. It looks like the reciprocal rates will stay where they're at for most of these countries in Southeast Asia, and potentially some exemptions for, again, those certain products in Annex 3 on the list. On Switzerland's, for all of these countries, Switzerland's a good example. What does this mean for you? There's already backlash in Switzerland. So in the media in Switzerland, they're saying that the Swiss government capitulated to the US. They're not happy about the agreement. All of these agreements are getting reviewed in these countries, and we don't know if the final agreements are going to look like the frameworks that we've seen so far. So there's not a lot of certainty around these, but I would say generally things are trending in a good direction. So again, similar to China, a little bit of certainty, but not a lot. The one on the bottom here I think is important because a lot of folks are investing in Mexico right now, sourcing in Mexico. And there's a big concern about this USMCA review that has started, that got kicked off here in the US. And whether or not USMCA, as we know it today, will remain in effect. And the administration has said that they don't like the deal. They would prefer a bilateral agreement with Mexico and a separate bilateral agreement with Canada. So at this point, we really don't know how this is going to shake out. I would say, in my opinion, we talked about predictions earlier, the administration is leaning toward bilateral agreements. At a minimum, there's going to be a lot of drama around USMCA until it gets renewed, if it does. And I think there's a strong possibility it may not. And you might see, again, two separate agreements. I think all of this just speaks to the importance of diversifying. Dimerco talks a lot about this China plus one strategy. My advice would be, if I were in the seat of an importer, because there's so little certainty, you don't really want to double down on any single location, right? I think diversification right now is the name of the game. So if things change, you have the opportunity to pivot pretty quickly.
Karen,
Yes, sir.
recently we talked about the AI server from Taiwan or semiconductor before that from Taiwan to United States, and the government is under the negotiation between Taiwan and the USA because we have a lot of opportunity or focus that. So from your perspective, how you look at that negotiation? I think the negotiations had to be done before end of this month. Taiwan not on your list yet,
Right.
but there's a lot of AI server or semiconductor coming from Taiwan. What your projection or your understanding?
Yes, I think that's a great question. The three parts to that. There is nothing in the news right now, and no rumors that I'm hearing from my sources say that there is any pending agreement with Taiwan. That doesn't mean it won't happen, right? Because sometimes these happen very quickly without any warning. I think that is not going to be country specific. I think that will be product specific. So I think what you will probably see is not an agreement with Taiwan, but an agreement in certain commodity sectors. And some of that, right now there are rumors, we'll talk about that in a second, about how the administration's thinking about those semiconductor 232 tariffs. And that will likely be twofold. It will likely be product specific, but also company specific. And I think we're going to see more of these company based deals where certain companies have carve-outs for zero duty or a lower rate of duty. So,
So now it's 20%, 10%. Taiwan.
20%.
They try to end at least to meet and like South Korea 15%, but they still I think they pay on the negotiation.
Yeah. all of these are non-binding, and not to ruin anyone's day, we're going to get to this other slide in a minute. If the IEEPA tariffs are declared unlawful by the Supreme Court, all of this is gone. Because all of these agreements, framework agreements, are IEEPA agreements, and they're all gone. Hit the reset button, start over, right? So that's important to remember. And that was actually an argument that the government posed in front of the Supreme Court was, we've carved out all these great deals, look at all the investment we're getting, and if you declare them unlawful, it's over.
So back to which time? Because there's so many different types. Is this
So if the IEEPA tariffs are declared unlawful, then all of the IEEPA-based tariffs that are part of the court case would be gone. And that would be the China 20%. I talk with my hands. China 20%. It would be the Canada and Mexico fentanyl tariffs. Right now, 35% Canada, 25% Mexico. And all of the global reciprocal tariffs, which are all different rates now, right, depending on the country. All of those would be gone. The India tariff, right now, the Russian oil India tariff and the Brazilian tariff are both IEEPA-based. They're not included in the court case, but everyone thinks if the others are declared unlawful, there would immediately be a lawsuit to get those declared unlawful too. So all of those tariffs would be gone, and all of the agreements surrounding those tariffs would be gone. So the framework agreement with Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Switzerland, the next ones we're going to talk about in Latin America, the EU, the UK, Japan, thank you, South Korea, all of them would be gone. They all have IEEPA as the foundation. And technically, I'm old school, so in my day, Congress negotiated trade agreements, right? All of those agreements have what would traditionally be like in a NAFTA or USMCA agreement. They have labor standards, environmental standards. So then the question would be, does Congress step in and, ratify some of the agreements that have been made separately? And then, there's a whole question about other duties that other tariffs that might replace the reciprocal tariffs. Hopefully that's not too confusing. And thanks for jumping in with a question. Anybody that has questions, just jump in anytime.
For those starting on April, right? Those the announcement on the April.
Well, actually February, right? Because the first one was China, 10%, then it increased to 20%. And we're going to talk about getting your money back. I have a tote board in my office, and I'm keeping track of every dollar everybody gets back. I want everyone to get all your money back. And keeping track of that's important. That's a really great point.
But it excludes for the 301 and 301.
Right. It excludes the Section 301 and 232s are not included. And they have a very strong legal basis. So it's unlikely the 232, the auto parts, and the Section 301 on China and potentially on Nicaragua, it's unlikely those would go away. So these are the latest updates. Again, these are all just framework agreements. These were agreements made with several countries in Latin America, no effective dates yet. All of them have the potential for some of these products in Annex 3 to be exempt from the reciprocal tariffs. And importantly, El Salvador and Guatemala, everyone's been watching this. Anybody in the textile and apparel industry, many of those folks are making products in El Salvador and Guatemala, and we're benefiting from CAFTA. And this would have a carve-out for CAFTA. So this would be similar to a USMCA carve-out, which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world right now. So that would be a big benefit. Certain qualifying textiles and apparel would be exempt from the reciprocal tariffs. Again, these are frameworks, they're non-binding, no timeline's been released. And we'll talk about this. Sorry, go ahead.
It's a good question.
Sure.
In the same way, like, if the AP characters drop down, like, doesn't push for refund? some of those agreements have like a carve out the limit 232.
Right.
Like Japan has one. I think
Yep.
South Korea have a couple.
Yep,
If
you
that
can.
goes that way, could they come back and say, hey, like, you now owe an additional 10%? Because like I don't do auto, but let's it's Subaru auto. Auto's capped at 15% out of Japan.
Right.
Could they come back and say, well, since this was never an agreement to begin with, for the last like X amount of months, you now owe another 10% on everything you. In the same way we're coming back for refunds, could they essentially, send you a notice saying like you now owe an additional 10% on anything you've imported from XP?
Great question. I think that's unlikely from a legal footing, but that hasn't stopped the administration from implementing some of these other measures. So it's possible they could try. I think it's unlikely, but you raised a good point. What they also could say is effective immediately, you owe 100% 232s.
In the same way, like we're saying, give us a basically, right?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that they would be able to collect duties on previous entries. I think that's unlikely from a legal footing, but going forward, they certainly could. And so you could find yourself paying higher duties
Yeah.
than you did before these agreements were put in place, because suddenly your reduction on, for example, the UK, as a special deal, 25% on metal 232s, that could go away. Yep.
Just to note, so this like an FYI, we had a couple shipments that we had stuck in, like during that period where, Liberation Day was like, hey, beat us on the 2nd, but then on the 9th, right, they snuck in.
Yep.
There was some like very tight deadlines during that period, and we had one where it came in a 0, but then because of the timing and the paperwork, there's a possibility that our freight broker would say, okay, there's a possibility they might come back and say, they did back in October.
Okay.
So they did charge us for that, and then a small penalty, obviously, even though it was their wording within that had said,
Yep.
the cost of confusion, they still came back and
Yeah. Hopefully you protested the penalty, but
it was so small.
all right.
A couple hundred. So we just.
I don't want them to even get $200. Somewhere.
But I mean, they did come back like 6 months later.
Yeah.
And ask for
Yep.
to say like we did.
That can happen. And that's why some lawyers are recommending that when you file your IEPA protest, we'll talk about that in a minute, you cover the in-transit language. So if the IEPA tariffs are declared unlawful, then you would get the dollars back anyway, right? But if there's any question on in-transit, you can cover that. Goods in transit that are in that little window there, you could cover that in your protest too. Okay, so here we go. Also in this, we'll talk about this in a minute, we also had the agricultural exemptions got announced. And my thought on this is that the administration is concerned about the U.S. economy. And that's what's driving a lot of these measures. The agricultural exemptions that got announced on beef and bananas and coffee, I think is really a way of the administration trying to dial these tariff backs a little bit to help them in the midterms. But depending on what happens in the midterms, they won't have that concern in the 3rd and 4th year of the administration. So we really have to think about, where we might be, because some of these measures that they're dialing back could be put back into place again. In addition to this, since I created this slide just quickly, on the good news side, Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan have a possibility of getting permanent normal trade relations status from the U.S. government. And if that happens, that would be a potential sourcing opportunity for importers. They would have column 1 duty rates, which they don't currently. And also Congress is considering Russian sanctions. And the bill is supported by the president. and that would allow the administration and Congress to put additional duties on any country that is doing business with Russia and potentially Iran. Quick commodity updates. Most of this is old news. We've got the new 232 tariffs on lumber, upholstered furniture, kitchen and bath vanities, 10%, 25%, 25% in a few weeks, January 1st. These are all increasing. We've got the commercial vehicle, medium, heavy-duty truck, and bus tariffs that went into effect on November 1st. I just mentioned the exemptions on agricultural products. Those went into effect on November 13th again, presumably. The administration looking to make points before the midterms. There's a lot of products on there. If you need a copy of that list, Dimerco has one in their tariff tool. And keeping data to support your exemption is really important. Many think the cattle ranchers in the U.S. are unhappy about the beef exemption, so that one might get pulled back. There are new 232 exemption investigations on PPE, medical equipment, robotics, and industrial machinery. Watch for this. I think it's very likely we will see additional 232 tariffs on all of those products. And we already talked about semicon a little bit. There are two proposals out there right now. The one that folks think is most likely to move forward is the 1-for-1 ratio. So for any company that is importing this commodity, they would have to keep track of how much they imported versus how much they manufactured in the U.S. and pay 100% tariff on any overage, more imports than domestic manufacturing. And I think, in the 232 space, what this means to you is that the government is setting the stage. If they lose the IEEPA argument in the Supreme Court, they're going to put more of these commodity-specific tariffs in place. Okay, most important slide coming up next. Get your money back. So, I didn't know this is a thing, but everybody gambles. And there are prediction markets, and there are people gambling, putting money on whether or not these IEEPA tariffs are going to get repealed. And as of yesterday, I check this every day, the prediction markets say that the administration has a 24% chance of winning. That's pretty low. That's pretty low. So there's a good chance that you have an opportunity for any IEEPA tariffs you've been paying. Again, that's Canada and Mexico, China, 20%, and all of the global reciprocal tariffs. Oral arguments were heard on November 5th. We're expecting a pretty quick decision. It may not be black and white. It may be gray. They might say some are unlawful and some aren't. They seem most skeptical of the global reciprocal tariffs. But either way, these are the steps you want to take, and we can help you with this. I'm committed to this in case you didn't notice. You want to make sure you have an ACE portal account, a free customs portal account. Go out in ACE, pull your data, see how much you've paid in IEEPA duties, check the liquidation status of the entries. You have 180 days from the date of liquidation to file a protest, to keep your entry open so that if the Supreme Court rules the tariffs were unlawful, you get your money back. It's likely that if the entry liquidated and you haven't protested it, you won't be eligible for the refund. And remember, those oldest entries were when you were paying the highest tariffs, especially if you were bringing product in from China, right? There was a time you were paying 84%, 125%, 34%. So you want to track liquidation, file protest. You can file a protest yourself in ACE with a little guidance from a lawyer to make sure you got the right legal language in there. Keep track of your bond. That's important. If you're protesting entries, it's keeping those entries open, so it might extend your bond liability. And this is important too. If you're paying your duties through ACH, you want to make sure you have an ACE refund account. So if the duties are refunded, the dollars will get deposited directly in your bank account. You won't have to wait. Usually takes almost 8 weeks longer to get a refund through a paper check. And sadly, don't plan on the tariffs going away. The administration has a lot of options to institute other tariffs.
So, there's a lot of people asking that, because after this 314 days of the Labor Day, it will automatically go into the protest for 180 days. But in this kind of the case, what do we suggest to do the executive extension or just move from liquidation to protest the writing?
I have an answer for you. And I didn't before. So some experts were suggesting you extend liquidation. Some are suggesting protest. And I believe that the protest is the best way to go. However, I have a couple of friends who are importers, and they went with asking for an extension on liquidation, and CBP just refused them and sent them a message and said that it is CBP policy where they are not going to approve a liquidation extension request under IEPA.
Okay.
I also have a client who has filed a bunch of protests, and the first ones got approved today.
Okay.
So they're going to hold those entries open until there is a decision from the Supreme Court.
So meaning if they get rejected from the extension, then it still be okay to go just
Go file a protest. And going forward, don't waste your time on the extension. Go directly to the protest, filing the protest. And ACE is really cool. I'm a geek, I get it. But it's pretty cool because you can put together a protest it's an unlimited number of entries, 200 entries. Upload your protest in the ACE portal and log in all of the entry numbers that it applies to. It's like a 10-minute exercise. I've done a bunch of them, super easy. And again, if you're not doing this now, or if you're a little lost and you want some help, you know where to find me, or you will, I guess, at the end. My email address will be up there.
We direct the file that or like Dimerco can help.
The company can do it directly, and we can help. We can help you set up an ACE account if you don't already have one. We can help you figure out, we've got a little training tool about how to export a report for the IEPA duties. There's a little PowerPoint presentation, and we can do a screen share and help you set up the refund account, help you load protests, whatever you need. Okay, so let's head to the next slide. Okay, so a couple of quick topics, and I'm just going to check to see where we're at on time here. A couple of quick topics here. This one I think is most important. It's a little worrying, illegal transshipment. So there's been a lot coming out from CBP on quote-unquote transshipment. And they're sort of casually redefining what that means. And there are rumors that they may officially change the definition of transshipment, essentially giving a wider definition of what transshipment means. And there are some rumors that in some of the agreements, especially with Vietnam and Southeast Asia, this could reference China-owned manufacturing and limit your ability to claim, for example, a product is made in Vietnam if the factory is 50% more or more owned by a Chinese company. None of this is official. This is all rumors. They're supposedly working on this inside CBP. I think you're not going to see anything in the near future because I think they just finalized their agreement with China and they don't want to, ruffle the feathers. But this is something to keep an eye on. This would also impact factories in Mexico that are owned by Chinese companies. But the bottom line is you want to make sure you can trace all of your component materials. If you have components coming from China into a third country, anywhere in the world, you want to make sure your country of origin declaration to CBP is accurate. And there's two sets of rules. There's one for USMCA. There's a separate for non-USMCA. And you want to make sure that the country of origin you're declaring is accurate, and you can substantiate that substantial transformation or equivalent change in order to declare a country of origin other than China if you have component products coming in from China or anywhere, frankly. Steel and aluminum valuation, if any of you are paying 232 steel and aluminum and copper duties, as you know, you can declare for cost basis, duty cost basis, the value of the inputs of the copper, steel, and aluminum. CBP has been issuing CF28s recently and questioning some of the values that are getting declared. So you want to be really sure that you have proof of that the value you're declaring for these 232s is accurate. And there are also concerns about products wholly of copper, aluminum, or steel. Some officials in CBP are saying that the full value of a product wholly of that metal is dutiable at the 232 rate, that you can't deduct things like packaging and overhead and labor. So you want to get some good advice there. And then we've got potentially a bunch more products being added to the steel and aluminum list shortly. There were 95 petitions to add more than 680 HTS codes to that list.
I had a question there.
Sure.
Country of origin. How
Yep.
how deep can the government go?
For example, with DHAP, our coming manufactured product, we know they manufacture some in China, sometimes they're manufacturing EU. Now they're shifting strategies. They're trying to avoid tariff. We get a listing on an invoice saying, hey, here's the country of origin. We don't know exactly how, when, timing of that inventory was produced where.
How far can they go at? How do they dig into that?
So that's a fantastic question, and it tees up a conversation that we want to have about that, and that is that they can go pretty far back. And they have an extensive amount of data. They just signed another contract with a company, an AI company called Exiger. So there's a chance they know more about your supply chain than you do. So they're tracking where your supplier is getting their components, second tier, and then they're tracking where your supplier's supplier is getting their components, third tier, and they have visibility into all of this now.
So, but we're responsible at that point?
And you are responsible. So the law says that you are responsible to know where your product is coming from, and that under reasonable care, you are questioning. It does sound bad. And yeah, it's not pretty. And I was on a call this morning. He's not wrong. I was on a call my East Coast time at 7 o'clock this morning talking about this, and I talked to a former CBP official who is still on the inside there. He was an assistant commissioner at CBP, and he told me that, I got to look at my notes here and make sure I got the right number. They just got funding to add in 40 investigators at the Department of Justice that are working in coordination with CBP and DHS on exactly that issue. They are tracking supply chains, and they are going after false claims, and now they can go after importers under the False Claims Act. This is new, which allows them to issue higher fines and penalties, and also undertake criminal investigations.
But I think
The penalty would start at the manufacturer. Then it would be the first line of defense at this point, right? I mean, I'm not saying I would throw them on the bus, but it'd be like, well, it's Kainzai says here, your country of origin is X. I'm going to get it over.
Rely on that to some degree?
No. CBP says you cannot, and the law says you cannot rely on that at all, that it's your.
And how would I get visibility where they're manufactured?
So there are a bunch of ways that CBP says you should get visibility. First is you should ask. And my advice is that you should ask them to certify it in writing in all cases. So I recommend that in your purchasing contract, you have language in there that says that the supplier is certifying that the country of origin on their documentation is accurate and what they tell you is accurate. And that if at any point they shift source locations for component materials, they have a legal responsibility to notify you. And then you give yourself a ton of protections in that contract. So that's number one. CBP says you should ask. Number two is CBP's assumption is that you're visiting these facilities where your goods are being manufactured and you're taking a look at components and you're talking to folks about components. And then last is a lot of importers, depending on the size now, are buying these same programs that CBP has access to. Some of them are budget friendly, and they allow you to take your import documents and you load them in, and it will immediately, it's pretty cool, show you a world map and show you where all the components came from. Put the little arrows in, show you the manifest detail, and essentially you then know the same thing CBP knows. You never want to be in a position where CBP knows more about your supply chain than you do. That is not a good thing.
Offer that tool?
No. They're using the tool, but it's also open to importers. Some of the programs that are out there are ridiculously expensive, right? 6-figure starting point. But there are some that are budget friendly, that have really great options, and that, by the way, work not just for this, but also for that like 50% rule. You can put if you want to work with a new supplier, you put them into these systems and it will tell you if there are any red flags. It will tell you if there are any previous investigations, give you a lot of really good data. So I'm sorry, I'm delivering bad news there. But anyway, product level 232s, a lot more coming there, again, because of the IEPA case. And the administration sees this as a way to kind of fine tune their hits on tariffs.
Yeah, just a really quick question. I mean, it may not be quick, but with the 50% rules, eventually, I get, obviously, they probably want to be careful, at least the next year. But we're working with like a subsidiary, like this, specifically in another country other than China, but let's say the parent company is owned by China, that would still be an issue.
Yeah, that's what the 50% rule says,
Okay.
right? So if the ownership of that qualifies under the 50%,
Like separate.
yeah, it doesn't matter, right? The owner, and that's why it's so hard to implement as an exporter, right? Because sometimes some of that's opaque, right? It's not like you can go like Google it. But there are software, again, some of these same companies that offer these software packages have those tools. A lot of forwarders have those tools at their disposal to help you screen that. But now you've got a year to kind of figure it out, right? At least take a little bit of time and figure out what your solution is.
And then in the event we have, like, let's say most of the components are sourced from China, there's a substantial transformation that happens at another, in another country. Are we still okay there? Or, I mean, because then it technically is like, the origin point should be like that new country, according to like what the rules are, right? If you qualify for that substantial transformation.
So here's the thing. Under USMCA, it's super easy. It's a science. It's not an art, right? Because you go to the rules of origin and you either have the tariff shift or you don't. You either have the RVC, the regional value content, or you don't. But for non-preferential country of origin, it's not that simple, because what the law says is it's not just about substantial transformation. There's 4 categories that you have to take into account. Value, does the nature of the product shift, right? And then you've got the tariff shift, and then you also have the value added in the country. Is it a complex process that occurs in that third country or not? And Dimerco has a really great checklist to help walk through that.
Also had, like, obviously it's like our free brokers look at it, give us their opinion as well. I'm mainly talking about, some sort of electronics transfer where my components are put together, but
Yeah, even
a little unfair. It's like, almost every raw component is being sourced in China right now, for the most part.
Yeah.
When you break it down to the,
But there's a percentage, and it's couple million that you can claim briefly. Yeah. So for example, SMT buys 400 components in a board, but yeah, whether it's a post processing or not, right?
it depends on the process that occurs. And CBP has issued rulings on this, right? So if it's a simple assembly process or something that CBP views as being a simple process, then substantial transformation has not occurred. But in a lot of cases, especially in the electronics world, CBP has ruled that substantial transformation does occur, but it's subjective.
I guess my question is, with this potential change, could that ruling change, or would they still abide by what they previously put together?
Yeah, I would say that all bets are off.
That's the concern.
Right now. I mean, from what we've seen, I think, anything could change. And I think depending on what happens with the IEEPA tariffs, you could see some significant changes occurring. And it could also be product specific. That's not off the table at this point, that there are product specific rules of origin. It would complicate things.
Yeah.
And I'd have to retire earlier than I'm planning to, because I can't read any more executive orders on a Sunday night.
Over the whole weekend, right?
Yeah, over the whole weekend. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And the next one. Okay, so what can you do about all this? This first one is important. You want to audit all of your customs entries. It is so complicated right now that brokers can't keep up. Even the best broker in the world can't keep up. And even if the best broker in the world can keep up, they have software vendors that can't, right? So as we just said, 5 executive orders drop on a Friday night, and on Monday morning, the broker has to be doing your entries right. It is super hard. So it's really important to be checking your entries. CBP says you're supposed to check every entry before duty is paid within the 10-day window. That's a regulation. A lot of importers don't do that. But at a minimum, you want to be checking them on a regular basis. If you have that ACE account that you're going to use for IEEPA, you could use those reports to check your entries. There are some tools out there you can load your broker data into to check and make sure there aren't issues. But if there are, and you've overpaid duties, and I can tell you, for all of the importers that I've worked with, I haven't worked with one yet where I haven't found significant issues. And in most cases, folks are getting money back. So you want to take a look and claim back any overpaid duties through PSCs. Make sure, to the point we just talked about, your valuations and your country of origin and classifications are right. This is the time to really dive into this. And you really want to be working with, you want to have a strategic partnership with your customs broker and freight forwarder. It can't be transactional anymore. It's too complicated. You want to work with a company like Dimerco that's got the right resources, not just here in the US, right, but around the globe. It really, really makes a difference and gives you an advantage. There are some ways that you can reduce the value, which is the basis on which you pay duty. You want to be taking advantage of all of these. Depending on Incoterms, you can take out transportation costs. There's first sale, transfer pricing. You want to be talking to the experts about that. We talked about things like USMCA and CAFTA. You want to take advantage of those if you can. Experts are important. There are a lot of different exclusions now and stacking logic. And Dimerco has a tool where you can load your products in and see exactly which tariffs you should be paying. And then you can use that data to audit entries later. And most importantly, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So don't get sucked into, crazy schemes that a supplier might have. You want to make sure you're doing things the right way, because As I said, CBP's got a lot of resources now, and if you end up with CF-28s or 29s or fines and penalties, it's just going to distract you from what's important. Okay, so what to expect? We already talked about this. Expect more commodity-specific tariffs. That's a given. There are already a bunch of cases that are out there. We're probably going to see those get finalized over the next couple months. And there'll also be a lot of product-specific exemptions. We talked about semicon. We just had the ag exemptions, and then eventually probably company-specific exemptions. And that's a good vote, too, for being engaged with your trade associations in your vertical, because there's often a lot of advocacy that happens in trade associations to get exemptions. I have a friend who's working with the trade association for coconut water, believe it or not. And the list just came out on Friday, and what was added to the list of exemptions but coconut water. So advocating, locally and inside your vertical is really important. Expect more country-specific tariffs and uncertainty around these agreements. We already talked about that. The agreements are all non-binding. And I think we've seen that the administration is going to use trade, unfortunately for all of us, to negotiate a host of non-trade issues, right? So some other issue may come up, like the Russian oil issue right now, and ultimately that impacts your tariff rate out of India or some other location. I don't think that's going to go away. Company-specific tariffs, I think, are definitely coming, especially in the semiconductor space. We've already seen it happen within pharma, in pharmaceuticals, and I think you'll probably see it with medical devices as well. A lot of these companies are carving out special deals where they get exempted from 232 tariffs. We talked about USMCA. I think you can expect some significant changes to that agreement if it does stand. And you just want to be careful about doubling down on any single source location. All right, and last one. All right. Expect more tariffs. So there was sort of this little, I read all of these are called CSMS messages. They come from CBP. And 2 came out recently, and they're ones that would normally fly under the radar. But one of them said that CBP reprogrammed for up to 32 HTS codes on a single line, a single entry line. 32 HTS codes on one line. And then this one to me is the biggest indicator. They programmed for an 11-digit bond amount, which means you would have a $1 billion bond. So that's just an indication that they're expecting duties to be very high. I have a friend who is in the surety business, and she just wrote her first $1 billion bond, a $5 billion bond for a company you would probably all recognize. But that just shows you how high the tariffs are. Your bond amount is 10% of the duties you pay. So if your bond amount is $1 billion, you can do the math.
Are they still trying to restrict those 7 countries to get the single ball? The surety company?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The surety company, are they still trying to restrict those 7 countries to get the single ball in that case?
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to go away.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they go to $1 billion bond, for the continue that they have to pay 100% commercial, which is the same.
Right. I think it's unlikely that companies in that space would be there. Yeah. Yeah. And then the other recommendation is if you're paying anti-dumping or countervailing duty, or you're moving goods through an FTZ and you have regular entries, the recommendation now is to have multiple bonds, not a single bond. It's more cost effective and it's easier to manage in the long term. And then I think this is obvious, but don't plan for any free trade agreements happening anytime in the near future. I think just generally global trade has been transformed in 10 months time, and we're not going back. So I had a conversation with a friend recently. Whoever ends up in the White House 3 years from now here in the US, um, I think this is not gonna go away, right? So even if there's somebody completely different in the White House 3 years from now, there's a lot of money on the table now, and that's gonna be hard for anyone to walk away from. And there's an anti-trade sentiment in the country right now. I think we saw this right when Biden stepped into the White House. The Section 301 duties didn't go away, right? And there was no effort to make them go away. So I think this change, unfortunately, is here to stay for quite some time. And so preparing yourself for that, making sure that you're following the rules, as complicated and unfair as they are, is really important. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.